now. And thanks to everyone for being here again. We really appreciate it. You will be so glad that you did.
I can only second that. Thank you so much to anybody who is showing up in person today. This presentation is really the culmination of years of experience with parrots. I think it may shock some people. It may please others to a great degree. But at any rate, these things need to be said. So thank you for being here. I'm quite excited to be presenting this information to you. So I've had an interesting last couple of years. I retired from being a veterinary technician about 4 years ago, spent a couple of years just consulting and writing my blog posts. But then for the last 2 years, I didn't even really have time or energy to write those blog posts because I was having such a very condensed consulting experience. I was working 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, easily. New requests for consultations were just pouring in. And so it afforded me a very condensed look at life in America right now and in other countries as well, at the way that we keep parrots. And at the same time, I was performing kind of an internal experience in that, people are asking these days, they're asking questions. People who live with parrots are kind of outgrowing the information that they have lived with for so long. And they're asking questions like, are cages even necessary? So I was interested in this. And so for the last 2 years, I kept my cages, but my 6 African grays were never inside of them. They used them as play stands in addition to their other play stands. And at night, they would just fly into my room and find perches in there. It actually was a very lovely existence. I've enjoyed it, but it resulted in some serious problems, and I have information to share with you about that. And so my conclusions after the last 2 years were that behavior problems occur under very specific environmental conditions, and they are predictable. Even feather damaging behavior is predictable. And that our current thinking about what parrots need and want is 20 years old, and it's based upon experience with clipped parrots only. So a reassessment about what we're doing with our companion parrots is really long overdue. And we need to be asking some additional questions, all of us, on all of our social media lists. These should be topics for conversation. What do parrots really need for a good quality of life? I've done quite a bit of research in this area. And the information that I was able to find that was written, by qualified individuals was that for captive animals in veterinary clinics, parrots who live in cages, zoo animals, quality of life was largely determined by 2 specific things. Number one, there was a great ability to make choices. And number 2, they were able to perform natural behaviors. Second question, what are the deal breakers? There are deal breakers in that if you do step A with a parrot, you're going to have problems. So deal breakers might be feeding a seed diet. You're not going to have a well-behaved parrot if you're feeding a seed diet. Another deal breaker would be not being able to get out of the cage in the morning, having to spend 20 hours in the cage and then just get out for a 4-hour stretch. Parrots cannot tolerate those sorts of adverse conditions. What are the common practices that now are harming parrots? We have many of them. And then how do we educate the public to get this these ideas across and this new information into the hands of those who are caring for parrots, we've got a real challenge in that regard, because social media is driving parrot care. It's not me, and it's not the veterinarians, and it's not Phoenix Landing, who does an excellent job educating. I mean, we all add our voices, but by and large, the people who come to me with behavior problems, they're working with information that they got from social media. So let's look at current practices. What is the state of our parrot keeping practices right now? So a pair bond is typical. Every single consultation that I do has a pair bond present in the home between the parrot and the human. Also, owners relate to their birds through touch. Many owners regard their birds as babies or fids, feathered kids. Bird rooms are the norm. Relinquishment is occurring at high rates, and owners are confused and they are stressed. They don't know what to do. You know, when they come to me, they're so grateful just to have somebody say, you know, you shouldn't do this and you should do this, because they've been at a loss for years. And, you know, one of the worst things is that no one has any understanding of neophobia. So we're going to look at each of these individually. Let's discuss the pair bond. I am convinced that pair bonds form with close physical contact, and that would include sitting on the shoulder, sitting on the arm for a long period of time. Some people even carry their birds around on their hands, you know, for extended periods, sitting on your lap or your knee while you're watching television. Really, any sort of close physical contact is going to guarantee that that bird forms a pair bond with you. And pair bonds will also form with some shared activities as well. For instance, if you let your bird sit on the arm of your chair all the time when you're working, or on the top of your computer, those will trigger ideas about pair bonding in birds. And pair bonds dictate the quality of future relationships, because when we form a pair bond with a parrot, then we've hijacked that bird's life, because that bird will replicate that same type of bond in the next home. And I'll say a bit more about that later. Also, having a pair bond present appears to increase hormone production. Now, I want to say something about these words, hormone production. I'm not sure that that's the best way to describe this. Barbara Heidenreich uses the term hormone amplification. And because I pretty much, you know, think Barbara Heidenreich walks on water, I've tried that on for size. I've looked at the definition, but it just doesn't kind of fit for me. But neither do I know that, you know, reproductive hormones actually increase in accordance to some of these close physical activities. But I can share some stories with you that are pretty interesting and that really bring up a lot of questions. So one of them is the story of Maria Pia. This is an African gray purchased as a baby by a single gentleman, and he is a bit lonely and he really loved his African gray. So she was pretty much ever present on his shoulder for the first 2.5 years of his life. And they formed a very close pair bond during that time. And now at 2.5, Maria Pia is sexually mature. So, and this often happens. I can't even tell you the number of cases I've had where a young parrot begins to feather pick just as they hit sexual maturity. And nobody figures that out for the most part. You know, many other reasons are blamed for the advent of that behavior, but it's usually because the bird has had pair bonding experiences and then all of a sudden becomes sexually mature. And now that close physical contact takes on kind of a different meaning for that bird. So with Maria Pia, one day the owner was sitting and watching television in the evening, as he always did, with her on his shoulder. But this time, he was quite engrossed in his show. And then when he looked down, his chest was covered with her chest feathers. Now, to his credit, he called me right away and we began work together. And my advice to him was, as it always is to owners, and that is that you can't change the way that a bird sees you or looks at you, but you can certainly change the activities that you do with that bird so that you are not maintaining this pair bond or giving the bird the wrong impression over time. And so he was great. It killed him. It really killed him to have to move her gradually from his shoulder onto a station, because this is the answer to pair bonding. You teach the bird to station. And because owners have such a hard time with this, it's interesting. I always ask owners, do you want to do this gradually, or do you want to do it cold turkey? I've only had one person say, I want to do it cold turkey, and the bird was like absolutely fine. That wouldn't be the case with many of them. But Giorgio did his best anyway to start to move her off of his body, and things improved. There was no more feather loss until one day he was really, really missing having her on his shoulder. And so he said to himself, well, it won't hurt for just a little bit, just 15 minutes. And so he put her on his shoulder, but he lost track of time. And again, there was a major episode of feather destruction because she was on his body. And this occurred twice more, once when she was on his knee and once when she was on his shin. He just kept trying because it was such a loss, such an emotional loss to him, because he'd been getting his emotional needs met by having her on his shoulder. And so to this day, the feather picking is better, but it still does continue in sort of a cyclic form. So I don't know what to say about that. How could this happen? How could a bird not feather pick when it's off of a person's body, but it does when it's on the body? But I have lots and lots and lots of cases like this. So that's a little bit of a mystery to be solved. And I will tell you 100%, if there is a pair bond present between a parrot and a human, that is a guarantee that behavior problems are going to arise. This is the major problem, the major thing we are doing wrong with our birds. And then we also, as humans, we use touch for bonding. And in this way, I really believe that parrots and humans are mismatched, because we as humans are compulsive about touching, including me. I see it in myself. I was in a department store not too long ago, and I saw a woman reach out to touch a coat just as she was telling her son not to touch what he was touching. She was oblivious to what she was doing. And I have been, as a veterinary technician, in the position sometimes of being in the exam room and talking to an owner about behavior issues, explaining that, it's not appropriate to pet birds down the back or under the wings or on the chest. And while I am explaining this, the owner will be snuggling the bird and petting the bird down the back. There's a little bit of a disconnect there. And then, this is very reinforcing for us that we like to touch things, because we have always formed bonds with our mammal friends through touch. So we have a long history of believing that this is the right way to form bonds with animals. But it's a problem with parrots, because touch between wild parrots is much less common and is usually aligned with breeding. So we've got to use touch responsibly in our lives with our parrots. We just can't have things all the way we want them. Now, seeing parrots as babies. This is a real problem because it justifies micromanaging the bird and being overprotective. And it justifies cuddling as well. So I have had people tell me that they didn't believe that their bird could climb up the bars of the cage. So they've been helping them, or, providing a ladder or something. People really have no idea about the capabilities that their parrots have. And the qualities that they bring to that relationship. And so all of this overprotectiveness really results in a lack of new experiences for the parrot. The owner will introduce a new play stand. And when the parrot reacts as if slightly afraid of it or even terrified of it, the owner says to the parrot, "Oh, it's okay. It's okay. You don't need to get on it. Oh, we'll give it to the friend down the street who's got 6 parrots. They'll use it." So there is a real need to see birds as they truly are in our population. And that, I believe, is going to come about as we keep more and more flighted parrots. So bird rooms, that's a big topic. And I'm against bird rooms. I'm on the record, have been for a long time, because they subject the parrots to a form of isolation unless it is maybe a small parrot flock. So if you have a flock of budgies and cockatiels and maybe some green-cheeked conures thrown in there, and they all interact with each other, so they have formed a cohesive multi-species flock, then giving them a big room with lots of trapezes and hanging perches and, creating a habitat, that's fine. But if you have a bird room like this with pretty walls, and this is actually, there's some nice hanging perches and things in this bird room as well. But the problem is that most parrots orient towards the owner as their flock. They don't care about the other parrots in the house, especially if they're a different species. So if you've got an African gray in a bird room with a macaw and an Amazon and a Quaker and a green-cheeked conure, that African gray is not going to get much reinforcement. So there will be some, because there will be the ability to participate in parallel activities, but it's very hard on these birds, especially birds who live in single species flocks, because they perceive this as a form of isolation. Another problem is that bird rooms can result in distress for parrots if the cages are too close together. And this is something I learned more about when I was allowing my birds to enjoy my entire house as their habitat. I was able to see that parrots choose to be farther apart. They choose to have 4 feet or so between themselves. They rarely sit 1 foot apart from another parrot, even if it's another gray, before they fly off. And so this can result in a lot of distress just because you've got too many parrots with large personalities crammed too close together. But one of the worst things is that it makes it impossible to capture behaviors. So let's say I'm working with a client who has a screaming problem. Everybody knows you've got to ignore screaming, right? But that's not going to solve your problem. One of the most important things, maybe the most important thing that you have to do if you have a screaming problem, is to capture and reinforce talking and other desirable vocalizations. So if the parrot makes a pleasant sound, you might deliver a verbal bridge, yes, and then walk over with a food reinforcer. You can't do that if your bird is in a bird room, and that's why it's a problem. And so recently, I had a conversation with a colleague that I really respect, and it was about some folks who don't want their parrots in their living area. So they're creating kind of a separate living area and they will have furniture in that too, but it will mean that the parrots are separated from them. So essentially, it's a very fancy glass bird room. And I have advised these folks that I don't think it's a good idea to do this, but I wanted to, talk to somebody else about it. And that individual had some really good points to make about if there was enough enrichment, and if that side of the house, the aviary for the birds, had access to the outdoors, it might be okay. And I sat with that for about 48 hours, and I just don't think it's a good idea. I don't. Parrots are flock animals. They're not mammals, they're flock animals, and they need to be with their human flock. So I'm going to stand by my convictions. You can continue to convince me otherwise. We have a real problem with relinquishment. Anne knows that better than anybody else. But now, parrots are being abandoned in stairwells. My very good friend is fostering a macaw that was abandoned in a stairwell. Nobody knew how long it even been there. This is sickening, because if you really regard the qualities that these parrots have, you see a lot of similarities with human beings. And so we're treating these birds like this. We're just abandoning them like trash. We hand them over to rescue organizations without even a name or information about what they've been eating. That is common. And so, and then another big problem, I just want to touch on this for a minute, is that I think rescue organizations may not understand what's happening with the parrots that they take in, because birds with a pair bond, with a previous pair bond, will do everything in their power to replicate that pair bond with the person of the same gender in the next home. And if there isn't a person of the same gender in the next home, they'll make do, because this is all they know. Not only is it reinforcing for them, they've got this instinctive drive. And so having a pair bond is tremendously reinforcing, but it's all they know. It's how they know to relate socially. And so it's very common on social media everywhere for people to say, oh, I found this bird at the rescue organization and he chose me. It was so wonderful. Well, chances are no, he didn't choose you just because of you, just because you're special. Maybe you look like the last owner. Maybe the last owner had blonde hair like you, or wore glasses like you, and was the same gender as you. This is really what's happening. And so this needs to be corrected in the next home. The next owners need to be somehow prepared for this. And then the situation with neophobia is really a problem, because this impacts the acceptance of new things, of course. And owners have no context with which to understand their parrots' reactions when they offer new things. So they interpret it as pickiness. How often have you heard people say, my bird is really picky? Your bird is not really picky. I'm here to tell you, your bird is neophobic. He's just afraid of those new foods. And if you put a food in the cage and you leave it in there for long enough, I'm here to tell you that bird will eat it sooner or later. And then, they also believe that their birds don't like toys or don't like play stands, just because of that initial reaction that the parrot offers. So this results in greatly decreased quality of life for parrots. So somehow we've got to get the word out about that. Now let's look at current practices regarding diet and nutrition. I'm here to tell you, this is a current practice. This was a real thing. Seed diets are still very common, or what is even more common is for people to feed a mixture of 50% pellets and 50% seed, because that makes them feel better. They know the bird should eat pellets, but they don't, of course. Most of us know that if you offer that combination, the birds will only eat the seed. And when the seed's gone, the people are going to put more seed in there because they don't want the bird to be hungry. And then owners also offer excess carbohydrates and fats in order to make the parrot happy. The list of things that I get that folks feed their birds would just make you turn over in your grave. It just, it's unbelievable. Now, I want to discuss kind of a touchy subject. I anticipate it's going to be touchy. So veterinarians to a one are still mostly recommending 80% or more of the diet being pellets. And so I have questions about this. And I think we'll talk about them here in a little bit. I believe I've expanded on this slide. We also, because there's a vacuum of information about diet, you know, people are trying to follow the advice that they've been given by their veterinarians, feed pellets and then something else. So the something else that they decide to feed are usually fats and carbohydrates, not salads or chop mixes. And in this, so they become dissatisfied and they're going online to see what else can they feed. So now we have avian nutritionists on board who have confused things even more. And there are just a myriad of food options online for owners to choose from. But the problem is that most of them are really high in carbohydrates and fats. One of the first, this is a really good example. Do you guys remember the Crazy Corn brand? And Crazy Corn was, you know, it was true to its name. It had a lot of corn in it, but there was one variety called Nuts and Noodles, I think. So this is an example of the fact that people who manufacture food, they know what's going to get the parrots to eat it. And so that's why these foods tend to be higher in fats and carbs, and that too is a problem. So regarding seed mixes, I'm sure we're all familiar with the problems that they cause, but I had a client just recently who had never heard about this. So I will just say quickly that the high fat content in seed mixes will lead to problems like fatty liver disease, fatty lipomas, atherosclerosis. And they will also cause behavior problems because fat provides energy. So if you feed a high fat diet to an Amazon who doesn't fly, he's, you know, it's like feeding, you know, grain to a horse who sits in a stall all day long or something. And so that bird is going to be in a very amped up state of mind. He's going to be louder and he's going to be more aggressive. Also, my observations indicate that parrots eating seed mixes will display the more behavior that we describe as hormonal. Then also a direct seed to pellet conversion is almost never successful. I've met one client who was actually able to do that because she did take a very incremental approach to it, reducing the seed, and she got lucky. The bird gradually ate the pellets. But this is typically the advice given to clients in the veterinary office is you have to get the bird off of seed and onto pellets. And many times they're not given much more information than that. So they can't do it. It just is not happening. Owners and treats, you know, food is love, right? This, by the way, obviously this is a staged photo, but this bird really did get to eat butter on a daily basis because he liked it. Parrots do crave carbohydrates and fats. Those are the categories of macronutrients that provide the energy needed for breeding. I know it has been hypothesized that extra protein will trigger hormonal behavior, and I just don't believe it. Protein is used largely to produce muscles, tissues, bones, and so while, of course, parrots who are breeding are going to need more protein, I don't see anybody feeding excess protein in the diet. It's not happening, so it's not a problem. But what is a problem are the carbohydrates and fats that people are feeding these birds. They like to make their parrots happy. They also use treats for bonding. Often in the cases that come to me, there is a preferred person and a less preferred person. And so the typical strategy the owners will embrace is to have the less preferred person go up and offer treats. Number one, that never works. You will not form a bond this way because parrots are not grateful. They would just as soon steal stuff from you as have you give it to them. So they can still regard you with disdain if you go up and give them treats. And if a parrot is getting table food that contains carbohydrates and fats, then the parrot is not going to convert to pellets. So you really have to take, if a bird is eating a seed mix, you have to take a very global approach to diet conversion. And I do have a surefire way to do that. It's 100% successful every time. So pellets. What percentage of pellets is best? Do we really know? Do we really know? You know, what is their place in the diet? I believe pellets have a place in the diet. I think it's a real shame whenever I hear anybody say, oh, they're not going to feed pellets anymore. I just read in a questionnaire a couple days ago, they're ditching the pellets for a mix of dried flower buds and I don't know, two other items. You know what? So what are pellets? Pellets are a source of vitamins and minerals because they're fortified, right? That's why we take vitamins and minerals. We know that commercial farming methods have depleted our soils. So unless you're buying organic everything, it is possible that the vegetables and fruit that grow in our soils that you eat they don't offer you the nutrition that they might have 100 years ago. And so, sorry, I got to get a drink. So I believe for that reason that they do have a valid place in the diet for many reasons. I do have a blog post called Pellets to Feed or Not to Feed. And that provides a pretty good rationale for feeding parrots if you're interested in delving into this subject even more. One of my questions is, can they possibly provide all necessary nutrients to 400 different species of parrots? I don't think so. That's my answer. And that's why I don't feed a certain percentage of pellets to my own birds. One reason that I don't believe they can provide all necessary nutrients to all species of parrots is because I've done some research regarding soil analysis in different areas of the world. So let's take, for example, Africa. The soils in Africa are high in selenium. That means then that the plant materials that grow in those soils are also going to be high in selenium. That means that the parrots who eat those plant materials may very well have developed a higher than normal level or need rather for selenium in their diet. Do all pellets provide enough selenium for African greys? I have no idea. But I do know that Brazil nuts have a lot of selenium. And so I make sure that my greys get selenium they get Brazil nuts about once a month. We also have information from the wild as well as from captive parrots about crazy things that parrots eat. I've talked to Donald Brightsmith, who has done a lot of research with macaws down at Tambopata. And so what they were doing is sampling crop contents. So they would climb these incredibly tall trees, take the babies, these macaw babies, out of the nest, put a turkey baster down in the crop, suck out the crop contents, and then analyze that. And so what they found was that they would encounter a crop full of bark. The parents were feeding fairly significant quantities of bark to their babies. Why? We don't know, but we should have the answer to that. I have seen my African greys eating almond shells. And I remember a presentation that I listened to given by Jamie Gilardi of the World Parrot Trust back many, many, many years ago. And he was reporting that the diet of wild macaws contained 29% fiber. So what are we doing to birds if we're not providing enough fiber in their diet? That too is a necessary nutrient. Another of my questions is, could it be that a diet high in pellet content could cause an increase in hormone production? I believe it's possible because when I look at pellets, they are little carbohydrate pills. You know, they have enough ingredients to elevate the protein content, and they have sufficient ingredients for fat percentage. But then what is the rest? It's carbohydrates plus vitamins and minerals. So these, I think, could be little hormone producing, you know, little beads. I don't know this, but it's a question we need to be asking. So I'm not saying don't feed your birds pellets, but we need to know more. And along those lines, what we really need to know is this: what is the percentage of protein and fat in the wild diets of these different species? Because coupling my observations of how different species, how they choose food in captivity, coupling that with what I know about how different parrot species live in the wild, I suspect that the protein levels that some of the New World parrot species like Amazons need may very well be lower than the necessary protein levels for African greys and some cockatoos, because those latter species descend to the ground in order to feed on carrion. Greys have been observed feeding on carrion in the wild. They also eat fruits of the oil palm in the wild widely, and they're available almost year round. So, you know, there's just so much more that we need to know about diet. And I'll say a bit more about this later in terms of providing direction. And now the avian nutritionist. So there's no such thing. That's what I want you all to know. There is no such thing as an avian nutritionist. There's no board certification for avian nutritionists. Granted, there are people who are very knowledgeable, but it's really hard to tell those who are really knowledgeable from those who talk a good game. So what usually happens with these new folks on the block is that they present new knowledge about why you shouldn't feed pellets primarily. That's usually the target. It's kind of the same thing that Blue Buffalo did when they came on the market. You know, the higher end foods had grains in them. And so Blue Buffalo taught us all that grains are bad. Grains cause allergies. That's not true. If a dog rather is allergic to food, it's most often the type of protein that's in the food. It's not the grains. But, you know, Blue Buffalo's got us all believing now that grains are bad. And so it's a similar approach that some of these folks are taking. Pellets are bad, formulated foods are bad. And then they introduce their own special food that they sell, which should give you a bit of a heads up about the fact that there may be some bias involved in the facts that they present to you. What I have found when I look at these foods, somebody just recently was feeding a special homemade pellet that she was getting from an avian nutritionist. And when I asked her to look at the back of the bag, the fat content was 12.5%. Well, she's got a really super hormonal parrot. So that's not a good food choice for that Amazon. So we need to realize that different is not always better. And so people do need direction about what is going to work, but before we can really provide that, we need to know a whole lot more. Now let's look at current practices regarding environment and enrichment. The norm is a single cage, and this information comes from my consulting experience. And often that cage is too small. Most play stands are poorly constructed. When I'm working with a client, I tell them, do not go on Amazon or to Petco or to PetSmart and buy a play stand because you will be wasting your money. Let me show you where to go. Because most place stands do not offer birds much to do. They will sit up on the top perch all day long. Usually there's a couple of food dishes, but there's no toy hanger that allows the individual to hang a toy at beak level for the bird, because that's where birds want to interact with enrichment. They don't want to bend over and interact with enrichment. Some will, usually small birds will, but it's not optimal, certainly. Rotating toys is still a thing. You know, I have a question on my client form that asks something like, how often do you provide new enrichment? The answer is usually, I rotate toys. Well, that's not enough for these very intelligent parrots. There is a complete lack of training and guidance that is provided. There is no access to fresh air and sunshine. Parrots are not able to predict when they're going to get out of the cage. Sometimes they can, but often it tends to be very arbitrary and rests solely upon when it's convenient for the owner, as opposed to be implemented in regards to what the bird might really need. It is very common for owners to provide cavity-seeking experiences to their birds. And all these birds are getting 12 hours of darkness a night. We've sure done a really good job getting that point across to people, haven't we? So now, again, I'm going to take these one at a time. So a too small cage is the norm, as I said, but there's another problem. It's often much taller than it is wide. And so I will see green cheek conures or budgies or lovebirds in an 18-inch cage that is really tall and wide. I'm sorry, really tall and narrow, and they don't move around. Because if you have that dimension, that proportion to the dimensions, or that relationship between them, your parrot's not going to move around very much. You know, parrots are designed to move laterally. That's the way they fly. They're not helicopters. And so it will hamper a bird's desire to move around if you provide a cage like that. So those birds do much better in those aviary style cages where they have, you know, room to fly. Dome top cages are still the most popular. Those were originally advertised as better than play top cages because they allowed more room in the cage for the bird. That is just absurd. You know, birds don't live in cages 24/7, not usually. So that argument holds no water whatsoever. There's no consideration given to perch placement at all. I have seen cages. One example is there was a perch provided to a bird, and it was in the upper 1/3 of the cage. So it's a perch that bird is going to gravitate towards. But it was put so close to the back of the cage that the bird literally could not perch and look out the front of the cage because there wasn't room for his body between the perch and the back of the cage. I see food dishes without a perch in front of them. We really need to put ourselves in these birds' shoes when we're perching a cage and think about access. You know, how is a bird going to get from one place to another? Make it easy. There's very little variety in perch type or size, even still. Only the most knowledgeable of owners do that. Water bottles are common, and parrots really have very few choices about what they are able to do. Regarding foraging, people use it to keep parrots busy all day. That's the standard. They put their, they fill the cage full of foraging toys. Sometimes those have the day's food, sometimes they don't. So the parrot is able to forage all day long. But if you look at how parrots naturally forage, they forage twice a day. They don't forage all day long. They forage twice a day, once in the morning and again in late afternoon or early evening. And so if we brace those natural rhythms, you have much better success with foraging. Birds are just not that active between, say 11 and 3 in the afternoon. Cavity seeking. So parrots teach people to provide cavity seeking options to them. And it's very common, they're so clever. A little Goffin's cockatoo might open the pantry door and peek in and then look at the owner and with this cute expression, and the owner just can't resist. She's, oh, do you want to go in there? And before you know it, the bird is getting to explore the pantry. This happens in almost every home. I did an in-home consultation not too long ago with 2 African grays that were both feather picking, and that one was a male, one was a female. And in grays, that's not really an issue. Grays form kind of loose pair bonds, so you don't have the problems when you mix genders the way you do with, say, cockatoos or Amazons that form much stronger pair bonds. And so at any rate, it is very common for owners to provide this type of activity for their birds because it keeps them busy. Also, owners can't even recognize cavity seeking when they see it. I talked to one just recently with a bird who is very hormonal. I mean, this is the problem, people. We have a world of hormonal parrots out there. What does hormonal mean? They're all, displaying aggression towards the less favored person. They're masturbating, they're regurgitating. They are trying to get behind the couch cushions. I mean, it drives a parrot's behavior in most cases. And cavity seeking will absolutely lead to increased hormone production. There is an incredible lack of guidance, and this surprises me because we always pay lip service to how smart parrots are and how emotional they are. So we all accept the fact that dogs need basic training, but it never occurs to people that they need to train their parrots. So this is at the very heart of behavior problems because parrots need reinforcement, and not just parrots, all animals, from earthworms to humans. We all need reinforcement from somewhere. So if there is a vacuum, the owner is not providing guidance by capturing behaviors or actively training behaviors, then the bird is going to throw out behaviors to see if some reinforcement might be provided. And this is how screaming and biting develops in most cases. And it leads to this lack of guidance, then leads to the use of punishment, because we are a punishment-based society. It is all that we understand. Punishment is everywhere. If you run a red light, you get a ticket. It is, it is, punishment is the heartbeat of our society. It's what makes things roll. And so it is the standard for dealing with behavior problems in the home. Most typical are timeouts and verbal reprimands, and sometimes much more awful things. In terms of getting out of the cage, this has to be predictable for parrots. They need to be able to predict things in their lives. In the wild, things were predictable. In our homes, they often are unpredictable. Parrots need 2 periods out of the cage every day. But the problem is that many people treat their parrots like a toy. What I mean by that is this. It usually happens with small birds. So the owner's working during the day, but he decides to take a break. And so he goes and takes the parrot out of the cage and plays with him for 20 or 30 minutes while he has a cup of coffee, and then he puts him back in the cage. And that might happen 2 or 3 or even 4 times during the day. This makes parrots crazy. They do not do well when this is the case. They can't, they have no control over when they get out. It's not predictable when they're going to get out. It's incredibly frustrating. It results in a lot of frustration for parrots. So they really do best with some sort of predictable schedule when they know when they're going to get out of the cage. Ooh, parrots need 12 hours of uninterrupted sleep every night. This is my fave. So this has never been true. It's not true. It wasn't true when it was printed, and it's not true now. And I have a blog post with lots of research that explains why it's not true. I'm not going to go into all of that here, but I will tell you that I was assistant editor of a magazine back a long, long time ago that published this information. And it was written by an individual who had only lived with one bird in their whole life, and that bird was a blue and gold macaw. And that bird wanted to go to bed at 7 every night, and the owner got the bird up at 7 every morning. And so she concluded all parrots need 12 hours of uninterrupted sleep and darkness every single night. Now, this whole topic has become a huge mess because sleep and darkness have gotten confused. They're very confused in people's minds. So often veterinarians will recommend providing 12 or even 14 hours of complete darkness in order to reduce hormone levels. I don't like this advice for many, many reasons. Number one, it interferes with social life and providing guidance. Well, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to this issue between sleep and darkness. So if we just look at sleep and bring in our common sense, just think for a minute. Is it dark in the wild? No, it is not. And it is not quiet in the wild. There are nocturnal animals moving around all the time. There are nocturnal predators. There are members of the flock themselves who are making noise or being restless during the night. In no way, shape, or form is it quiet or dark in the wild. And parrots do not need 12 hours of darkness every night or 12 hours of sleep every single night, no matter how you look at it, because they will, for one thing, parrots and all birds sleep with only one hemisphere of the brain at a time. This is how many birds can migrate. They will fly for thousands of miles without stopping because they can sleep while they're flying. So that's one bit of evidence that indicates that this is true. Regarding the issue of darkness as a way to reduce hormone production, I don't recommend that either, because it interferes, as I started to say, with social life and the provision of guidance. If you work from 8 to 5 and then you get home at 6 and your bird has to go to bed at 6:30 or 7 so that you can get him up at 6:30 or 7 before you go to work, you literally have no time with that bird. And I have dealt with many cases like this. The reality is that most parrots do really well. If they go to bed at 9:30 or 10 at night and get up at 6, they're just fine in terms of having enough sleep. Now, in regards to this notion of providing extra hours of complete darkness every single night to reduce hormone production, I don't recommend this for that reason either, because it only really helps around the edges, and it's not true at all for old world birds. New world parrots, so those are going to be your Amazons, Quakers, macaws, pioneers, conures. They are the birds who tend to display more hormonal behavior in the spring. But your old world parrots like eclectus, cockatoos, and African greys, they first become more hormonal as the day length decreases. So I have lots of African gray clients who tell me proudly that they're providing 12 hours of darkness for their bird to get them to be less hormonal. And the first thing I have to say is, well, don't do that anymore because it's making your problem worse. And there, the triggers for hormone production, the really strong ones have to do with pair bonding and petting and cavity seeking and a diet high in fats and carbohydrates. So this trick just helps around the edges, and it has caused a lot of problems also because once people believed that this was true, then we needed to do something to ensure this. So the practice of sleep cages was begun. I can't tell you the number of times these days when I say, stop using that sleep cage, because the parents are interacting with the sleep cage like it's a nest. I'm going to tell you about one client in a bit who had two pioneers, a male and a female. And her solution to the need to provide a sleep cage was to use her Keltie backpack that was a double. So she would put the female pioneers on one side and the male pioneers on the other side, and then put them in. And so they had a wonderful time. They had a little nest cavity there at night. And it emulated wild patterns also, because this is what happens with breeding pairs. They will be out of the nest cavity during the day, a good part of the time, especially some of the New World species, and then they go into the nest cavity at night to sleep. So this can be very, very, very detrimental. And you will know if your parrot is interacting with your sleep cage as a nest cavity if you see that he just dives in there. He never resists going to bed. He wants to be in there. He doesn't even need a treat. And then in the morning, he may not be so hot to come out. You may have to try 2 or 3 times to bring him out into the main house. That's how you will know. Now let's look at current veterinary practices. Fear-free practices are still uncommon for avian patients, and it is high time that we got this into the veterinary world. It is a crisis. We have to do this. People don't want to bring their birds to the vet because the birds become so distressed. So that is a problem. There is fear-free avian education available for avian veterinarians through the Fear-Free organization. That organization, the face of which is Marty Becker, provides education to veterinarians for cats and dogs that teaches them how they can provide all the same services that they have been providing, but in a manner that does not cause as much distress for the cats and dogs. Now we have a program for avian veterinarians. Barbara Heidenreich and I and 2 extremely just amazing avian vets, and I'm sorry, their names escape me at the moment, but we 4 collaborated for 2 years to write this program, and it should be regarded as essential learning for all avian veterinarians. Because one reason is that it sets the client and the veterinarian up to be partners. They work together. The client trains veterinary behaviors at home, and the veterinarian on his end does things like hands-off exams. That may use midazolam in order to provide some conscious sedation to prevent a fear memory from developing during an exam. It's a fantastic problem. So please get the word out. And really, as people who own parrots, You are the ones who need to be driving this. You need to go to your vet and say, maybe just mention after an exam, boy, he sure seems distressed to me. This just makes my stomach, clench. And I know there's education for free avian exams. Would you be interested perhaps in some information about that? We need to let our veterinarians understand that we want this because it's work for them. It's going to require a complete change in the way that they do things. And I don't believe that just the goal of becoming more ethical is going to drive this into general practice. Another problem is that beak trims are done on a routine basis by veterinarians. A client has a baby Cape Parrot, 5 months old, took it to the vet for its first visit, and there were some layers on the side of the beak. And so the vet thought that was wrong and dremeled those to get rid of all the layers, which caused extreme distress to the parrot. That beak is full, it has a blood supply to it. It's full of nerve endings. It is not cool to trim beaks, to do routine beak trims. Parrots do not need their beaks trimmed unless the beak is making it difficult for the bird to eat. So, and beak trims should not be done on a cosmetic basis. That's what I'm getting at here. So if there's malocclusion causing difficulty eating, or if the beak is overgrown, then yes, certainly you have to do a beak trim, but they should not be done routinely. Grooming is being done by unqualified individuals, and a real pet peeve of mine is something that a vet I worked for used to do. First vet I worked for would not do it, and it made a lot of clients angry. He would not do grooming unless they agreed to have an annual exam. They didn't have to do blood work or anything else. No testing was required, but they did need to have an annual exam. That taught those clients that it's correct to bring your birds into the vet. And they finally did grow to appreciate that approach. But the second vet I worked for, she wanted to be nice. And so she was doing grooming all the time on parrots that might have health problems from the way that they looked, and she was not requiring annual exams. That's wrong. Also, do not take your bird to a bird store to have nail trims done or things like that. I personally worked with a blue-fronted Amazon who got a dislocated leg from a nail trim performed by a VCA hospital that saw birds. They weren't an avian vet, but they did see birds. And moreover, I have a real problem with this issue of nail trims for birds in captivity. It's almost like a national pastime. Every client I talk to is worried that their bird needs a nail trim. You go on social media, nail trims. My bird needs a nail trim. I'm here to tell you today, the birds who fly, they don't need nail trims. They trim their own nails down. And I've observed a lot of parrot feet. I'm just an obsessive observer. And I've concluded that, parrots are zygodactyls, so 2 toes in the front, 2 toes in the back. I have found that the 2 toes on the outside, their nails are always longer in a bird who doesn't have routine nail trims. So we've got to ask ourselves, well, maybe that's the way their nails should be. So what are we doing to them when we just whack, 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 get their nails back to where we think they should be? I don't think that's a very respectful practice. And now, to my great disappointment, veterinarians are repeating this information that all parrots need 12 hours of uninterrupted darkness and sleep every single night. This is not true, and it is detrimental to parrots. We should not be recommending this. No one should be recommending this. It could be that a parrot does need that much sleep because behavior is a study of one. And so we're always going to look at our individual bird, and maybe your bird does need that. I know a couple of cockatoos, both umbrellas, they want to go to bed at 4 in the afternoon, and they are adamant about that. They will go put themselves to bed. So they are getting even more than that 12 hours of sleep. But as a recommendation, it's incorrect to be making that. Now, let's look at the information network. What are we saying about parrots? All parrots need this. All parrots need that. We've got to stop this. Don't ever let these words leave your lips, please. We have over 400 different species of parrots. And just regarding the issue of what we provide, the environment that we provide at night. African greys and cockatoos are often active after dark. Greys have been observed flying after dark in the wild. Cockatoos, small cockatoos especially, are often vocal during the night. Owners report this to me fairly frequently. And so we have to have our focus on the fact that each parrot species is different, and we have to learn as much as possible about their natural customs. So when I get a client, like, I can't remember the species of bird, it was, over a year ago, but I wasn't familiar with it. It was a small parakeet. So I went to my book, Parrots by Juniper and Parr, and I read about their natural behaviors. And this is a bird who doesn't even go to roost until midnight. So perhaps that will convince you that, all of this, all parrots need is incorrect. We cannot be speaking that way. And we have a huge, huge problem with social network because of something called the illusory truth effect. I finished a consulting day in the past year, just so frustrated. I was just gritting my teeth because with every single client, I had to address that business about sleep and darkness. And I thought to myself, how can people possibly believe this? Because if you even engage your critical thinking skills, it's not true. And then I have a blog post, well-researched, that proves it's not true. There is other information out there that it's not true. But the illusory truth, so I'm sorry, at any rate, I was so disgusted. I did a Google search that I didn't really expect to find a result for. What I searched for was a long phrase, something like, people believe stuff just because they hear it many times. Up pops the illusory truth effect. This is described as a glitch in the human consciousness. And it ensures that we will believe a thing to be true if we are told that it is true multiple times. So there are studies that have illustrated this, one of which I read about. It was fascinating. There was a group of college students, and they were being asked to watch a video. They knew that they would be asked a question afterwards, and that was pretty much it. So when they went in for orientation, they were told by the administrator that they were going to be watching a video that was going to tell them something, and the administrator was telling them right now, before they ever watched the video, that this statement that they would see multiple times was not true. So they're informing these students, even though you're going to hear this over and over and over, it is not true, and we'll be asking you at the end if it is. So the students watched the video, and at the end, they were asked, is this statement true? And 201, they answered, yes, it is, because they had been told only once that it was not, and they heard multiple times that it was. So this is what's driving that 12 hours of sleep stuff. Please stop repeating crap like this. If you have not heard it from an expert who has researched it, then you don't know. If you just heard it from someone else, you really don't know. So go and research it for yourself. Don't just take the word of someone else, because this is what is driving our information network, is the illusory truth effect. these fads of, here's another one, parrots being itchy when they molt. I don't believe parrots are itchy when they molt. I mean, owners are really worried about this. They're like, oh, should I spray them with aloe? Should I do this? Should I do that? I mean, they're really worried that their parrot is considerably distressed because he's molting. Well, when I think about this, I think that knowing that predators look for weakness, any signs of weakness in their prey, molting could not possibly be inconvenient for parrots, because if it were, they would show that in their behavior, and that would attract the attention of a predator. And so I just don't. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Anne, what was I talking about there?
We were talking about, I'm sorry, for 1 minute, I was off in a different direction and missed this moment. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. No worries. I distracted myself, so I got kind of off track. But at any rate, the itchiness with
Molting.
molting. And so I think that what people observe is that when they do their parrot's pin feathers, it provides relief. The birds seem to enjoy it. So it's easy to conclude that the bird might have been itchy or inconvenienced by that particular pin feather. And so people then go online, and they may have seen their parrot scratch once, but then they go online and they read that parrots are itchy when they molt. So they conclude, oh, my bird is itchy, that's why he's scratching, even though he may have only seen that bird scratch once. So, this stuff gets started, and then we are distracted from the real topics that we should be talking about. And this illusory truth effect is such a staple in our society that liars are well aware of this. Politicians use this. They know that if they just keep saying the same thing over and over again, people will believe them, even if detractors are making more sense. So the cumulative effect of our current pair-keeping practices is pretty poor quality of life, illness and dysfunction, behavioral dysfunction. Parrots are not able to perform natural behaviors, so their quality of life is decreased. They have a severe lack of choices. Behavior problems are everywhere, online and with my clients, and eventual relinquishment is the result of how we're keeping parrots. How can I be so sure? I'm sure I'll get this question. Well, how do you know this, Pam? How do you know that your ideas are right? Well, because one of the things I realized over the last 2 years when I was consulting nonstop is that essentially every single consultation is the same. Every single client has a pair bond with their bird, and it's resulting in aggression towards other members of the household. And when I deliver recommendations, they are almost the same to every client. I have the same diet that I recommend for every single large bird with some variations, and a different one for every single small bird with some variations. I implement the same environmental provisions, often a bigger cage, more stands, etc. I change social interactions so they're not maintaining that pair bond, and I provide training, and that solves the problems. I have a very, very good success rate. And I was gratified recently. I watched a webinar that Hillary Hankey gave. She is an excellent trainer and also a behavior consultant. She does what I do. And she gave a webinar not too long ago that I attended, and it was called something about, I'm so glad I was wrong. And essentially, she was saying exactly this, that training and behavior interventions are destined to be unsuccessful unless you build other behaviors. You teach the parrot to eat the right diet, teach him to accept more toys and interact with them, teach him to accept new play stands. In other words, build other behaviors. That is the only way that you're going to be successful in getting rid of behavior problems. And she's calling it the constructional approach. She has just discovered this. I think that is wonderful, because when experts come to the same conclusion, now that's something. So this is how I am so sure of my ideas. So I am here to say today that a reckoning is needed. Our current understanding of parrots, what they need, and what they're like, stems from misinformation that was published 20 to 25 years ago. It is still in our society. I still get questions about height dominance, which was debunked so long ago, but it still is, it rests in our, parrot keeping literature. And our current understanding also stems only from living with parrots who can't fly. That's profound. Clipped parrots are not displaying normal parrot behavior, but we've thought that they were. So we've based a lot of our ideas and our practices on what we thought parrots were like, because they were clipped wings and they only demonstrated certain categories of behavior. And then we've really got to do something about this misinformation that is perpetuated by social media. That's the biggest hurdle of all. So I want to introduce to you this idea of limiting factors. I'm going to digress a little bit here, because this is really an important point in what I have to say today. So a limiting factor is something that constrains a population's size and stops it from growing. So most often this term is applied, I think, to biological systems like a pond. So limiting factors in a pond might be food availability, oxygen saturation in the water, and space. If there's too much, not enough food, say, then the population won't grow. So that is a limiting factor. But social systems can also have limiting factors. So parrots bring to us two limiting factors. They bring these into our relationships. The first is that they are not domesticated, except for some of the smaller species now. It takes approximately 30 generations for a species to become domesticated from the wild, if you're not, breeding back to a domesticated animal or something. And so we don't have, our larger parrots do not meet that criteria yet. And so this means that they have certain needs that we can't argue with them. They need to perform natural behaviors like chewing on fresh branches, spending time outdoors. They need to fly. They need to have a schedule provided that allows them to follow a more natural rhythm to their day, including foraging twice a day, and they need wood that is soft enough for them to chew. The second limiting factor is that parrots are sexually active. Now, keeping dogs and cats that are not neutered has been proven to be incredibly inconvenient. I know some dog owners with unneutered dogs who do it with excellence, but mostly it's a real problem. We would have non-neutered dogs come into the vet clinic and they would just lift their leg on everything, maybe 8 times as they walked into the treatment area. It was a pee party. So unneutered animals display problem behaviors. That's why we learned to neuter dogs and cats. Granted, it does help their health in some cases, but that was the primary reason why we decided to do that. So nobody took a minute to say, whoa, these parrots aren't neutered. I wonder if this means we're going to have problems. This is a limiting factor, okay? Because these birds are 100% focused on reproducing. That is their instinctive drive. That is their natural drive. It's what they're focused on. It doesn't matter that they live in our homes, you know? So it's a biological imperative. So how this plays out is that everything that parrots feel strongly about, like toes or boxes or shoulders, is, you can be sure it's going to increase hormone production. So if you have a little bird who likes to sit in a box all the time, then you're going to know that you should get rid of that box. Or same thing with a larger parrot, maybe, who takes over the bookcase. You're going to know that that parrot cannot be allowed in that bookcase. So the general public really needs this information, because we cannot be using touch for bonding. This is wrong. We're creating a crisis for these birds by using them to meet our own emotional needs. Now, in regards to limiting factors, you can't argue with them. You can't change them. We can't do anything about the fact that parrots are sexually active. There is a veterinarian in Germany, and I do have his contact information, who is routinely neutering parrots using laser sterilization. But I don't know of anyone else who's doing it, and I don't have any details above that. But the rest of our parrots are sexually active, and we can't argue with that. We can't change that, nor can we change the fact that they're not domesticated. So here's the nitty gritty. It's our responsibility to accommodate our parrots rather than the other way around. And the state of affairs until now has been that we expect our parrots to accommodate to life with us. And really, it should be the other way around. We're the ones who took these birds out of the wild. So if you can't do that, if you cannot accommodate the needs of the natural needs that your parents have, and I'm certainly not talking about breeding, but I'm talking about, say, the ability to forage twice a day or the ability to fly. If you can't accommodate your parrot's most important needs for quality of life, then you shouldn't have a parrot. It's time to start saying that. Some people should not have parrots. They are just not for everyone. So we need to take a good hard look at just who is it in my living room. We have to get busy with some open-minded observations and research. Alex's sacrifice didn't do anything to help the homebound parrot, because people are talking left and right about how wonderful it was that Alex, it was so smart. They don't equate that to their bird. That was Alex. That's not their bird. I have clients just amazed, gobsmacked that their bird learned to target in the first session. They come back to me and they say, oh, he's so smart. I had no idea. So I think that it's the issue of anthropomorphism has delayed us from really being able to see who it is that we have in our living rooms, because we've been so worried. We don't want to talk online about our birds being emotional or thinking certain things. That anthropomorphism is not a concern in that regard. When it is a concern are times like when a client will tell me, well, I know he was mad about that, so here's what I did. You cannot make decisions based upon parrot care. You cannot base those decisions on your surety, your ideas about what your parrot feels, because you could very well be wrong. But the reality is that we have to dispense with this concern about anthropomorphism in order to see just who it is that we have in our living rooms that we're caring for. And we do have new sources of information. Experiences with fully flighted parrots. When a parrot can fly, then they can show you who they really are, because parrots use flight to express themselves. People who are very focused on training are certainly adding to the conversation, including those who free fly parrots. I don't recommend free flight for the average parrot owner. That is for experts or those who have a mentor on hand. But we're getting a lot of information from those people. And then ethological observations as well, people making observations in the wild. Some of this information comes from my consulting experiences and then my 2-year experiment with African greys. So let's take a look at this. Just who is it in our living rooms? Well, we know that parrots live in flocks. That requires cooperation, right? So that would be a higher level quality. How do these birds manage to live cooperatively in a flock like this? They are 100% capable of meeting all of their own needs. They don't need us to bring the water dish over to them. They can fly to a watering spot. They do not need us at all. So that speaks to their innate qualities. They share a common body language across a species group. So we must recognize they have their own language. We tend to think that parrots don't have language because they're not verbal. And we kind of disregard as just nice, some of their more pleasant songs and vocalizations. But parrots do have their own language, and it's called body language. And if we respect them, then we learn to read it. We learn to ask permission and then read that body language and then behave accordingly. And we all know that parrots have incredible problem-solving capabilities. The greatest proof, of course, is the fact that they can naturalize. How can that possibly happen? How can an Amazon escape from a house and find food and shelter and other Amazons and be able to breed? That's insane. They should not, I don't know if any other animal species capable of doing that. This is a miracle when you really think about it. So regarding the fact that parrots have language, yes, their native tongue is avian body language, but they have their body language they also use to interact with each other. For instance, African greys have a greeting that they will use with each other and with us if we allow them to do that. What they do is that if 2 greys approach each other on a perch, they will lock beaks one way and then lock beaks the other way, and then they will break apart and do whatever it is they were going to do on that same perch. My greys do the same thing with me. I'm sorry to say I don't have a video of it yet, but let's say I walk up to Marco and she drops her head for some petting. And so I will begin to ruffle her feathers forward, and she will immediately lift her head up and just gently touch my finger with her beak and then put her head back down again for some more scratching. Everybody thinks that African greys are trying to bite them. They're not. This is just a natural greeting. All of my greys will do this. My cockatoo, my Moluccan, also will do this if I walk up to him. If I bring my hand up, he wants to touch my hand first, and then he touches, lowers his head for some help there with pin feathers. Also, we don't recognize or have not widely recognized yet that parrots understand English or whatever language is spoken in the home. They're having a true immersion experience. This is considered to be a very valid way for people to learn languages. They go to a foreign country, just immerse themselves in the culture, and it's, they have to learn. So this is what we've done to parrots. We know, for instance, that a 2 or 3-year-old toddler understands most of what they're told, although they may not be very verbal themselves. I think this is the category in which parrots stand. I talk to my birds in sentences. When I ask my Moluccan if he wants to go outside, that is my question in words. I just don't walk over and say, step up. He deserves to know where he's going. And then he can say yes or no. And, I can say to a parrot, like, Savannah, if I have some food, she'll say, want one. And she might be, on top of the refrigerator where technically she's not supposed to be. And I will say, no, you have to be on a perch. And she'll fly to a perch. Maybe she only understood the word perch, but more, we have evidence that more and more of our companion parrots understand what is said to them. And because they are using language appropriately themselves. And parrots have crazy problem-solving skills. Naturalized parrots are evidence of that. Flighted parrots show this all the time. Navidad, this was back a long time ago when I just had this little cheapy cell phone. I had put it in a drawer, but he had watched me. So he walked over, opened the drawer, and helped himself to my cell phone. My kitchen cupboards are duct taped shut currently for lack of a better solution. Cockatoos in Australia often hit the news because of their problem-solving capabilities. Scientific investigation, we're all just gobsmacked when the Goffin's cockatoo can maneuver a treat out with a twig. Our parrots in our homes are doing this stuff on a daily basis. And I am met with some rather unique problems from my consulting clients, one of whom had a scarlet macaw named Coco, and this bird was fully flighted in the home. There was, in a particular area that was the parrots were often in, there was a kitchen island with a bar sink there that had a cross type faucet for turning on the water. After that macaw watched the owner turn on the water a few times, she decided she could probably do that. So she learned to turn on the water in order to get a drink, to help herself to a drink, because she preferred running water to water in a dish. But then she observed that when she left the water on, it made her owner come back into the room. So then she began to employ that as a technique to get the owner to come back into the room. These are the sorts of challenges that we're now dealing with as we keep flighted parrots. They are formidable partners or formidable adversaries, and that, my friends, is our choice. They are keenly intelligent in social and emotional on those levels. They study our body language keenly. They know our intentions. If you think your bird doesn't understand that you're about to put it in the cage because you're not giving away any cues, you're mistaken. That bird still knows what you intend. They know when a member of the family doesn't like them, and they will help each other across species lines. I see this, we've just had a very, very, very wet, cold spring here in Oregon, and my Moluccan Cyrano is not getting outside into his big aviary near as much as he usually does. So he's spending more time in his cage because he's not a candidate for a cage-free existence. And so when he's stuck in his cage, Marco, one of my grays, will often go over there and they'll pass things back and forth through the bars of the cage. So we are being able to observe these things now that we are keeping flighted parrots. We can also tell that parrots have a sense of time. And so does that not maybe imply that we need to take that into account in our parrot caregiving practices and make things predictable for our birds? There are parrots who, my Cyrano, he at 8 o'clock every single night, if I don't cover him up, he's going to start screaming his bloody head off between 8:05 and 8:15. So I am well trained. Now here's an amazing story. An African gray named Bella is quite an exceptional bird. She can speak like a person in terms of using human language. I have two clients or two grays maybe, sorry, two grays in my client base who speak like this. So the owner, the female owner, always came home at 5 o'clock, like clockwork. She was never late. And one day She went out with her coworkers. It was very unusual for her to do that. And this African gray, who had not been flighted when we first began consulting, it was a feather picking and self-mutilation case. We solved that, and by the time we were at the end of our work together, Bella was fully flighted. So on this day, when her owner did not come home at 5 o'clock, Bella flew to the other partner who was home and asked him incessantly, "Where is she? Where is Bonnie? Where is she?" How are you going to explain that? It's time for a reckoning, and for us to really realize who we're dealing with here, because we need to help them out by providing a more natural and predictable schedule. So the crux of the problem is the fact that we understand these concepts intellectually, but our practices are disrespectful. We infantilize them, we underestimate them, we diminish them, and we don't take them seriously. That is all disrespectful. So we may love them, but unless you're going to adopt some of the ideas that I'm going to put forth here today, if you're talking about your parrots as babies, you're not doing them any favors. That is disrespectful. They are not babies. So going forward, we've got to learn to respect them. We have to provide them with challenges that challenge their innate intelligence and abilities. We've got to acknowledge their resourcefulness, and we must learn to keep our hands to ourselves. I have a little dog that I love to death, and I cuddle her a whole bunch. And that's how I can keep my hands off my parrots. We need to perform research using their natural abilities. For instance, everybody who provides food to their parrot and the parrot doesn't eat it, they conclude, oh, he doesn't like it. Well, parrots, they probably are not choosing food largely on the basis of taste, because they don't have that many taste buds per square inch of tongue compared with, say, a human being. But I just read recently that they do have a very good sense of smell. So I've been wondering, I haven't put it to the test yet, but could we teach, it's really hard when you have an older parrot who's had a pair bond. One of the things that happens is they stop interacting with enrichment. And so if you're going to resolve a feather picking problem in a pair bonded bird, you're going to have to teach that individual to interact with enrichment. So that's hard. It's hard. We do it, but it's slow going. But I'm wondering, could we maybe use the sense of smell to teach foraging to parrots? Maybe if we, smeared a nut with peanut butter. I don't know, but we just need to open our minds and see what's really possible here. So I'm going to suggest some new standards to you. There should be no wing clipping. I hope that someday we get to this point where all baby parrots are fledged and there is no wing clipping at all. There should be no single parrots living in homes. A single cage is not near enough for a bird. We need to provide a single bird, two birds, any birds with a habitat, more choices. Parrots need to move around. That main cage has to be in the living area. They need a schedule that suits their needs so they can perform their natural behaviors and perform as many choices as possible. Daily guidance and training has to be provided. All parrots need to be taught to target and station. Time out of the cage needs to match their times of natural activity. They need twice daily foraging and a diet full of variety. So an outdoor aviary, I want to just talk about this as a standalone subject right now. This is not optional. Fresh air and sunshine is a parrot's birthright. It's not okay to just take a parrot out in a carrier for 20 minutes. They need freedom of movement when they are outdoors to really make best use of that experience. because they respond joyfully to it. Weather, breeze, sunshine, the sound of birds singing, something in a parrot responds to that. It awakens joy in a parrot to have that experience. We also know that for at least some parrots, it probably is necessary for vitamin D. Your full spectrum lights are not going to do it. I have a blog post researched about that as well. If you want a well-behaved parrot, they need to go outside. They need to, burn off some excess energy. And that experience has the same effect on them that it has on us. When we take a walk in the woods or something, we come back much more relaxed and feeling at peace. And birds will move more when they are in an outdoor aviary. So new standards in terms of wing clipping. It simply is not ethical to modify an other animal's ability to move around for our own convenience. I think that Jim McKendry put it best. He's a behavior consultant in Australia. And he said once in a presentation, if a dog gets out of the yard, you don't chop his leg. If a dog gets out of the yard and bites the postman, you don't cut his legs off. Instead, you build a better fence. This applies to parrots. Just because having them flighted is inconvenient does not give us license to, make it impossible for them to fly. But this should not be legislated, and it is in some countries. In Germany, it is illegal to clip a parrot's wings. I don't believe in legislating this because behavior is a study of one. And for one thing, if you have a fat Amazon who's been clipped for over 8 years or more, or clipped for 8 years or more, that bird is not going to fly, even if you let him grow his flight feathers out and even try and train some flying. You might get him to fly little distances, but the problem is he forgot a long time ago that he wanted to go places. He just lost that urge. So that bird is not a candidate for full wings because people tend to start to think that the birds can't fly just because they don't fly. And then you have these losses where people take their birds outside, a car backfires or a hose gets moved, they startle, there's breeze, and they have adrenaline behind that flight and they wind up in a tree and they can't get down. So we can't say at this point that all birds need full wings, but if you're adopting a young parrot, if you're talking to a breeder about buying a macaw and that breeder says, oh no, I won't send him home with full wings, I have to clip wings, then my advice to you is to turn around and walk away. That's the ethical thing to do. Because we have to drive better practices. We have to not just love our parrots, but love and respect them enough that we're not allowing breeders to continue this practice of chopping off flight feathers before that bird ever has a chance to take his first flight. And as far as, wing clipping for safety, I'm sorry, but that ship has sailed. Parrots are learners. It's just not necessary. Now, regarding no single parrots, I love what Jennifer Ackerman said in her book, The Bird Way. She wrote, there is the mammal way and there is the bird way. That is a very succinct argument for no single parrots. But I will hasten to say that, and this too is being legislated in Switzerland, it is illegal to keep a single parrot. So European countries are way ahead of us in terms of ethical practices with parrots, and we need to be catching up here. So you should not, though, adopt a second parrot if you don't want one yourself. But if you're getting 2 baby parrots, or you're adopting a parrot from a rescue organization, just think about 2. Get 2 baby parrots or adopt 2 parrots from the rescue organization. But never, ever, ever adopt a second parrot of the same species but a different gender if you're talking about species other than grays. With grays, it'll be okay. But with other species, it won't. Grays form loose bonds. I think I said that before. And don't expect the birds to interact. They don't have to be best friends and feed each other or preen each other. No, they will get support from each other just by living in the same house, because they will have the ability to perform parallel activities. Parallel activities are when birds all roost at the same time, or preen at the same time, or forage at the same time. These are critical for flock cohesiveness. We don't realize that, but they are. So these birds will also support each other at times of distress. Say they have to be boarded together, or you're going to leave and have someone come house sit. They have the other parrot there for a little bit of moral support. They're not feeling that they're just all alone in your absence. They also have the ability to share a common language. And it is unique amongst grays that they have such an affinity for each other. These birds, this was Boss and Phoenix, I want to say maybe. So I adopted, Phoenix was my bird, and I adopted him into this home where there was a single gray. Within 2 weeks, this was how they were interacting. Grays also have a common song. Many don't need to hear it because of the way that we hand feed most parrots. They never hear it, they never learn it from their adult counterparts, the wild-caught grays. So I heard it though, and my wild-caught grays that were breeders, they taught it to my birds, so I still get to hear it. And it is the most eerie and melodic and spiritual and magical sound. It makes you stop and just listen. So wouldn't we think that might be important to them, to have another gray if they have something like this common song? And then back when I was breeding grays a million years ago, I would bring the babies in from the nest. I wouldn't do that these days, but that's what I was doing back then because I was ignorant. So I was taking them away from the parents and putting them in a brooder. And then when they didn't need supplemental heat anymore, I was putting them into a nice big cardboard box on my kitchen table. And lo and behold, my adult grays, one of whom was Marco, would crawl into that box. And granted, you know, I was watching this with bated breath, ready to intercede, but all they did was parent those babies. They would stay in that box, sleep with the babies, preen the babies' feathers. They would even feed the babies. It was a very unique way of co-parenting that I had never expected could happen. So if there are any open-minded gray breeders out there, there's an opening for you. Oh gosh, we're at an hour and 3/4, Anne.
Yes, you are welcome to continue as long as you like. Your attendance is still high and we're here. So
okay, I'm so sorry, everybody.
No, it's completely your choice.
Okay, well, I'm
You have important things to say, so we're here to.
Okay, I'll try and shorten it up. So parrots need a habitat, not just a single cage. They need hanging perches, tabletop perches, climbing challenge, and freestanding play gyms. And I tell my clients, do not go on Amazon or to Petco or PetSmart in order to find a play gym for your birds, because you're just going to waste your money. I take them, I go shopping, I share my screen and take them. My favorite is the website My Birdie Buddy, owned by Nyla Klopp. She makes the Ava Station and Ava Hangs. Those appeal to a parrot's natural desires to move around from perch to perch, and then an outdoor aviary. So they need more than a single cage. Regarding the cage itself, I was unhappy recently to see a whole new wave of recommendations on cage sizes based on another formulation for wingspan. That is just ridiculous. An active Goffins is going to need a larger cage than an older macaw, a 42-year-old macaw who's never flown. That bird is not going to make use of a 62 or 83-inch cage. Moreover, the top of the cage is wasted. I think it's just a whole lot better to provide, even for the largest birds, a 48-inch cage with a play top and then alternate perching options. That gets closer to approximating a habitat. Now, I have people asking questions, is a cage even necessary? So I'm going to tell you a bit about my own experiment briefly. What I learned is that parrot territories, or their sense of their own territory, will expand to fill whatever space is available. If a bird stays only on his own cage, then he's likely to display aggressive behavior only around his own cage. If he stays only in one room, that's where he's going to display aggressive behavior. Guess what? If you don't have cages, the whole house becomes their territory. And that's a problem. Once I moved to Indiana, I'm not going to do this anymore. It does not work. Because I concluded that all my parrots care about are resources and territories. I saw so clearly that inclination to just focus on any activity that might lead to reproduction of the species. Now I have a cautionary tale. I have a client with, it's the one with the male and female pioneers who are both now becoming sexually mature. She actually got rid of her cages and created play areas for these birds. I worked with her. She was so consistent, so responsible. She did everything I recommended, and we were still having a heck of a time because anybody who came in that house just got attacked by those birds. And there was no amount of stationing that was going to solve that problem. So my answer is yes, we need cages. Parrots need to be in their cages sometimes in order to just decrease a bit their sense of territory in our homes. As far as the daily schedule, they need to wake up when we do and then have some time out of the cage. They need to forage right away. And then maybe if they have to go in the cage while we work, they need a new project and new wood to chew on that is soft enough. Then they need time out of the cage and a foraging dinner at the end of the day, and then bedtime when it suits them. I think we've talked about this mostly in that they need to perform as many natural behaviors as possible for best quality of life, except for cavity seeking and pair bonding. And guidance is necessary. All parrots need to be taught targeting and stationing. We need to be providing them with reinforcement for cued behaviors. So if we ask them to step up, they get a little paycheck. When they go back into the cage, they get a little paycheck. That way you always maintain compliance. And then in that regard, you're not going to have behavior problems around those sorts of cues. You're going to be able to capture and strengthen more functional behaviors like interacting with enrichment and talking. And the next point is subtle, but very important. And that is that when we provide reinforcement to our birds for cued behaviors or learning new behaviors, the ultimate result is that it gives our parrots a sense of control. Now, control is a primary reinforcer. There are scientific papers on Google that cover this that you can find. And they state that control is a primary reinforcer. So what that means is that it is as important as food to that parrot. Now, if you look at how parrots are raised, they have no control, right? They get taken away from their parents. They might be in a tub alone, no control over that, no control over everything. Just review in your minds every single choice that is made for them. They have no control over. Can you imagine what your life quality would be like if you had no idea how to get the things that you wanted that made you most happy. And so when an animal, say, talks and you provide a verbal bridge, yes, and walk over and deliver a food reinforcer, there's an aha moment in that bird's mind, and he says to himself, I know what to do to get that reinforcer. And so you give back some control, some measure of control to your birds. So this is not optional either. You know, it doesn't take a lot of time, and it's fun, moreover. So the big question is, how do we get from where we are now to some of these new standards, and who's responsible for this? How can we get the right information into the hands of those who need it? Do we just leave it to experts? Do we just do a webinar? Do I just write a blog post about lighting needs and hope that everybody reads it? Or are every single one of us sitting here today willing to bear the cost of speaking up? You know, I had to grapple with this. I have thought that there should be no wing trimming now for over 10 years, but I was just scared to say it. And now I don't care. I just have to stand by the strength of my convictions. And if I get a lot of crap for that, so be it. But parrots are important. We've done a terrible thing to them by taking them out of the wild, and we have to be responsible for them. So what am I going to do? I've been racking my brain. How can I possibly overcome the illusory truth effect? So I've decided the only way that I can possibly do this is to create a master class for parrot keeping, where I just simply teach everybody the strategies for keeping parrots that I know work with my own clients. And if enough people can come through this course, then I might stand the chance, we all together might stand the chance of overcoming, you know, or maybe co-opting the illusory truth effects that works in our favor. And then I've brainstormed what other ideas could possibly help. How about a quality of life scale? I don't know if any of you are familiar with the hospice quality of life scale that Dr. Alice Villalobos developed. So in each category, for hers, since she's using it with patients who are on hospice and their owners, the categories pertain to that. You know, is the animal hurting? Is it hydrated enough? Is it eating? And so on. And the owners are able to give an arbitrary score to themselves of 0 to 10. What would happen if we widely disseminated a quality of life scale to veterinarians, rescue organizations? You know, I mean, we could try and get it distributed as widely as possible, which would give owners a way to evaluate themselves and maybe understand that they were not keeping up with the more progressive thinking about what parrots need. So I don't know, it's just an idea. I haven't done anything with it yet. You know, maybe one of you wants to do something with it. Other ideas could be the parrot passport. It so troubles me that parrots are relinquished without even names. I mean, how disrespectful is that? We don't even think it's important enough that they might, you know, want to be fed the same diet. People don't even give that information when they relinquish a bird. So that could be given out by breeders when they send a new baby home. That baby could get the parrot passport, which would be just like a baby record book, you know, that could follow that bird from home to home to home. You know, granted, maybe this is idyllic thinking, but we've got to do something. So at any rate, those are kind of the things that I've been playing around with. So now I'm going to ask you, what can you do? You know, I'm going to put it on you to brainstorm new ideas. You can be a voice, or at least you can stop repeating that business about 12 hours of uninterrupted sleep every single night. You can try and embrace new practices and then share the results of what you found on social media so you can be an example. So thank you so much for listening to me today. I'm so sorry that I went over because I realize this leaves you now no time for questions unless you just want to stay. I am okay to stay until even 1 p.m. I've got a new consultation at 2 that I have to do, and I've got to go over that questionnaire, but I'll be okay, I think, if I'm done by 1. So I'm going to turn it over to you. And should I stop sharing?
Hey, no, that's fine. It's exactly
Okay.
fine the way it is. That's
Okay.
great because that keeps your information up there. So, of course, thanks as always for stretching our minds and challenging us to do better. And as always, trying to think of life from a parrot's point of view. I mean, that's the world we need to create for them, is the one that they feel natural belonging to, not
Yeah,
just
we
the
have
one
to.
we want. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Important question for you. What is the IAABC code word for today for those?
Yes, thank you very much. The code word is going to be progressive.
I like it. That's great. Aligns with your class. Perfect.
Yes.
And I just want to take a moment to remind people or inform people who may not know of our wellness retreat coming up June 4th and 5th, where we'll have quite a few extraordinary veterinarians who will address topics along the lines of what you discussed today, like hormones. And Jose's joining us, who's worked in conservation for a long time, and he's quite adept at talking about what birds eat in the wild, which is always a topic that arouses my passions. And Jen and Cassie will both be there to talk about reading and behavior and great stuff. So it's not too late to sign up. Okay, we have a few questions. There were, to consolidate a few of them, there was a lot of discussion about covering cages. Do you have kind of like a summary thought on that?
I do. I think it's a non-issue or a plus minus, let me say. And what I mean by that is that if you've been covering the cage and well, I used to cover my own parrots' cages, and what I found was that they habituated to that, and it did seem to serve as a convenient trigger for the beginning of roosting and then sleeping. So, and people will talk about this on social media. They cover their parrot's cage, and as soon as they do, they hear the beak grinding, and it seems to be something that the parrot really enjoys. However, if you have an older parrot and he's not had his cage covered, if you try and do that, you're going to scare the hell out of him. And so I don't recommend doing it in that case because it's just kind of the slow, laborious process of inching the cover more and more over the cage. And it's not necessary. Parrots do not need to be covered at night at all. They're not covered in the wild. You know, my parrots have not suffered one bit from this cageless existence. And my hours, you know, recently I've been up till 11 or midnight. There's days when I go to bed at 7. They just roll with it. We're the flock.
Right.
We're the flock together, you know, we roll with what happens in my house. And so, no, I don't cover their cages. So if you have been doing it, keep doing it. If you haven't been doing it, don't start.
I have to say,
unless you have a really good reason.
I'm horrified sometimes when birds come to us and they come almost with this moving mat type cover. I mean, it's so heavy and so thick, and there's like no airflow, and they don't. I think some birds need to know what's going on outside, and if they can't see it, they're like, that's more stressful, right? Yeah.
I agree completely because our indoor parrots do orient to the weather outside and the conditions outside. And I believe it prevents them from doing so if they're living under some big, heavy, dark cover for the sake of nothing important.
Right. Or it's a really great big nest all of a sudden, right? So
yes. Yeah, I find it's really common for people when they are covering the cage, they don't take it off completely during the day. And I think that's a problem. So if you are covering the cage, remove it, fold it, put it away during, but what some people will do is they just roll it back so that only the front of the cage is open and maybe a little bit of the top and sides. And then, yes, it becomes a nest in many cases.
Right, right. There was a question about when an African gray reaches sexual maturity, and I think that leads to a bigger question. I haven't seen anything in 20 plus years, I guess, about when birds reach puberty and then sexual maturity, because there's, for some, a period of time between
I
that that's
have,
important too. Have you seen anything recently?
well, I've developed some hunches of my own. No, I've not seen anything in print recently from anybody else, but I'm sorry, tell me again.
I remember a long time ago, over 20 years ago, Liz Wilson had something that came from Harrison's, which showed when certain species reach sexual
Oh,
maturity
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and puberty before that, because for a macaw, puberty could last for years, for, parakeet days.
Yeah,
So,
no, it's true. Parrots reach sexual maturity based upon their size.
mhm,
And so, a budgie or a green cheek conure can reproduce and do at 6 months of age,
mhm,
whereas a hyacinth macaw, I would be willing to bet that a bird like that might start the process at age 4 or 5 and not finish until 10 or 12.
mhm.
So I have seen some anecdotal evidence, just making observations that that tends to be the case, but I'm seeing some very disturbing trends. The New World parrots who used to start getting hormonal in March are now becoming hormonal in January.
Mm.
And African grays that used to become hormonal in November are now becoming hormonal in August.
Mm.
I'm also seeing baby
Climate
parrots.
change?
I believe it is.
Mm,
I think I'm also seeing parrots become sexually mature earlier in
mhm,
age as well. And
mhm.
I'm seeing some very disturbing behaviors. I've had 2 young African grays with clients. Both birds are fully flighted, and both were very cognizant about the need to not form a pair bond, but their birds are displaying aggressive behavior towards other people in the house, just on the basis of the fact that they might be in a single room with that person. This is really common these days. If there's 2 people in a home, it seems like there's his office and her office, and they come together only briefly,
Yeah.
and so the bird winds up being in her office all day long. And this was the problem with one of these cases. This bird began, even though he was he could not possibly even beginning to be sexually mature, he was displaying behaviors that we would expect of an older parrot with a pair bond. And
Gotcha.
I don't know what's up with that at all.
Yeah, the whole shift of climate everywhere is gotta affect
Yeah.
birds. They're so
Yeah.
much more sensitive than we are on
Mhm.
top of that.
Yeah,
There
so to answer that question specifically, I'm going to say they probably start at 18 months and finish at somewhere between 2.5 and 4.
is this a gray you're talking about?
Yeah, because that was the
Oh,
question specifically.
yeah. I thought it was more than that. That's interesting.
Mhm.
There was a few questions about nutrition and percentage of fat, etc. You have any kind of summary thoughts on that? Of course, it depends on species and individuals, etc. But activity level.
I'm trying to decide how I want to answer that. You cannot say that a certain bird should have a certain percentage of fat. We just simply don't know that. But I think we have abundant anecdotal evidence. It's not just me. Veterinarians have written about their observations that a high-fat, high-carb diet appears to lead to hormone production and then the behavior problems that result from
Mhm.
that. And so here's my strategy. I feed all my birds Harrison's high potency,
Mm.
and that's a high-fat pellet. That pellet has 15% fat. But the reason I do it is because I don't limit the other nutritional offerings in their diet, because I also provide chop mix, and then I provide Lefebvre, Nutriberries, and Ava cakes for the second foraging experience of the day.
Mhm.
So that is a very low-fat diet. The chalk mix is almost zero fat. The Nutriberries and Ava cakes are low-fat. I want my birds to choose to eat pellets for the fat content in their diet.
Right, right.
And then I leave that up to them. How much fat do you need?
I do the same thing.
And
Yeah.
for the Amazons, I do provide them with adult lifetime for the, they're the only ones who get the adult lifetime. So it's not true that it's all of my birds. And I have great success that way. So they can forage all they want through, you know, low glycemic index grains and an abundance of vegetables, and then the Lefebvre foods, and then they can eat as many pellets as they want. And I find that this works seamlessly. It just works so well because they have choice.
Exactly.
And so right before a molt, I saw my birds this year just mow down on pellets.
Right, exactly.
And they will also eat more of them in the wintertime when it's colder. They eat more chop in the summertime. So to me, this is ideal, but it's just my idea. You know, this is just the way I do it.
I'm with you. Pellets are always available, but it's not served as a meal. It's an opportunity to supplement as needed, basically.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
And they
I agree.
do. And the beautiful thing is they do choose to eat them. They like them. So,
Right.
you know, all of these detractors who are saying, you know, oh, you know, pellets are like dog food and, you know, all of these negative things. Why don't you just look at your bird? If your bird wants to eat them, you know, doesn't that end the argument right there?
Well, I guess you could, people who say that it might be when there's no other food choices offered, you know, if
Well, yeah, and I would never recommend that.
exactly. But you know, that like a lot of veterinarians, they're like, feed pellets. That's the meal.
Yes. And some very good compliant owners do that. And I have one right now. This bird is hormone levels are off the charts and he's eating 100% pelleted diet. So we're having to actually lower his pellet intake.
And then they become vitamin A deficient and all kinds of things. Yeah, yeah. I loved your phrase. What was it? Little carbo pills. I love that. About pellets.
I don't want to turn people against, you know, pellets. And there's a lot of noise out there about that. But
when it's the majority of the diet, that is what it becomes. So
I think so.
In that context, absolutely. Yeah. Let's see. A whole bunch of questions came in after we started here. There was a lot of people here today with cockatiels, which is great. I love that people see their little birds as just as important and equally.
I agree.
Yeah.
I do a lot of consultations about small birds.
Great. I'm sorry, a lot of it is long, and I don't see anything new here that we should probably talk about today. But so I think we're good. Unless there's something else you'd like to say in closing to summarize the world of parrots from your point of view. What's our takeaway today?
Well, I think if I were going to say one last thing, it would be that they're such an incredible gift. We did a crummy thing, taking them out of the wild and putting them in cages. That should have never been done. But that said, it has been done, and we're not going to stop keeping parrots. That ship has sailed. So we can embrace the gift that we have, but we need to recognize that that's what it is, you know, and instead we're trying to force this template that we know about how to keep dogs and cats onto our lives with our parrots. And it just doesn't work. You know, you can't, like with dogs and cats, we think about giving them attention in chunks of time. So we take the dog for a walk, or we brush the cat, or we, you know, hold the cat on our lap while we do, you know, something. And so this is how people are interacting with their parrots, and it's completely wrong. Parrots have a flock, you know, establishment for their social structure, and so we have to develop new ways of living with them, and we have to be humble. That's it. I want everybody to leave here today being humble and asking questions and trying to do better and trying to speak better on social media.
Right. Be critical
That's it.
thinkers, as in all things in life, but especially when it comes to our very cherished, very intelligent, and much
Yeah.
needed improvement quality of life for our parents. And I just want to put a plug in for adoption. There's
Mhm.
so many birds out there needing their next home, and there's never a shortage of need for homes. So
And I will say that buying a baby parrot these days is a bad deal. There's only one breeder that I know of who fledges babies and does abundance weaning. I'm sure there are others, but 25 years ago, we recognized that selling unweaned babies was wrong.
mhm.
And these days, there are more unweaned babies being sold. In fact, I have never heard of a baby
Yeah,
parrot being weaned these days and going into its home as a food independent parrot. And this is criminal.
yeah. That's
It's
because all the conscientious people like you, realized that it wasn't working and, took a different path.
yeah, we're the ones. Yeah, I couldn't keep reading because I didn't think it was ethical to put more birds out there. But I will say easily, without even wincing, that if you want a baby parrot and you can't find one that is fully weaned and fully fledged and hasn't had its wings clipped, then you should not be buying a baby parrot. You just
Right.
forget that. You go see Ann Brooks and you get an older bird, and then you come see Pam Clark, and I'll fix
Yep.
your problems and help that bird
Yeah.
acclimate to your home.
Right. And I'm always on the mission to change the language from rescue to adoption, just because,
Oh, thank you. Yes.
yeah, so many birds wait years to get into our system, and they're well-loved birds. They're not in
Yes.
a negative
True.
situation. And people just think of rescue as baggage, when we
Mhm.
know birds are the most adaptable, resilient, smart animals on the planet, in my opinion.
Yes.
So they take to new homes and new people pretty well if the people
Mhm.
are educated. Yeah.
Mhm.
The bird's not usually the problem, it's the people.
Yeah.
No matter
No,
which
that's
home
very
it
true.
is, first home or 10th home, it's usually the people who need the training. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, always.
Always. Always.
Yeah.
Well,
I had a client get really, really pissed off at me this year. She fired me because I told her I didn't need the bird present in the consultation. And I explained this and I explained it to her. I said, look, in order to change your bird's behavior, you're going to have to change your behavior. And in order to change your behavior, you're going to have to change your thinking. So we'll have the bird present later on, but not for right now. Oh, she just thought I was the worst consultant in the world.
she wanted you to give her the purple pill and it would just fix everything right then, right?
Yeah.
It's
Well,
the bird's fault.
yeah,
Yeah,
we're not fixing parrots, we're fixing people.
exactly. Here, here. And
People and
thanks.
practices.
What, say again?
People and practices.
Yes, absolutely. And I know we're all counting on you to keep pushing that envelope, as you
You
always
can,
have and always will. And you taught me 20 plus years ago to think more compassionately about life from the parrot's point of view, and to always strive to make it better. And we didn't know anything, a long time
Mhm,
ago.
mhm.
Um, and so people like you continue to make things better for birds. So
Well, thank you.
keep at
I
it.
appreciate that. Okay,
We
will
need
do.
you. We love you. And we are grateful for your time today.
Of course. My
Okay.
pleasure.
Thanks everyone for being here. If you haven't, please come sign up and come to the wellness retreat.
Yes, too.
Join us for our other future Zoom events. And definitely you see how to get hold of Pam if you need a consult. And it's like almost everybody needs to go to therapy. To me, you're like therapy for people. Everybody needs to like talk it through sometimes and want to do it better. So
Well,
even
I
if you
can
don't
tell you
have
that
a problem, it doesn't hurt to talk about it, right?
no, it doesn't. And my joy is seeing how happy they are as things become so relaxed, and there's just no problems anymore. They're happy with their bird and they're so grateful.
Right,
It's a good job.
right. Okay, thanks again, everybody, for being here, and especially to
I'm going to sign off.
the wonderful Pam Clark. And we'll see you next month for something fun. Bye.